So, in part two, I was describing how human civilization has progressed and evolved from the tribal state to the agricultural to the industrial. And in this process, it has, from a state of unity, fallen into a state of fragmentation. And the fragmentation of civilization as a whole has been mirrored in the fragmentation of the individual who is participating in all of these different institutions and so is pulled in all these different conflicting directions. Um, and our task is to find a way of maintaining the coherence of our planetary civilization without the collectivizing force of an ideology. Um, as Thompson puts it, an ideology, religious or political, is a form of possession, and as such, it is a possession of the ego. The state of consciousness of the daemon, or the self, is one of compassion, love for one's enemy, and a global awareness that above the battlefield is a single sun. The sun does not say that the rose is right and the dandelion is wrong. A politics based on anything less than this knowledge is fatal. So Thompson is really saying that for planetization to succeed without a complete collapse into chaos and fragmentation, we're going to need to transform human consciousness, perform a type of yoga such that the ego becomes the higher self and recognizes that truth, as Thompson says, truth is what emerges in the field of the sphere as one man engages his opposite in conflict. So we must perform, or our performances must be, or must come out of a mode of consciousness that's not rigidly structured like the ego, with its absolute boundaries between self and other. We've got to be able to surf the wave of the boundary of or between information and noise. We've got to be able to surf it a little more fluidly to avoid sharply dividing self from other, because when we do that, it leads to not only the fragmentation of the individual self, but the fragmentation of society as a whole, and that inevitably will lead to either a chaotic collapse or the rise of some collectivizing ideology. Thompson borrows a phrase from Gregory Bateson called an ecology of consciousness. And by that, he's trying to liken the political interactions of human beings to species interacting in an ecosystem. And certainly there are conflicts and competition within an ecosystem. But this competition works toward the stability of the whole system. And in a similar way, as Thompson says, quote, what Bateson's philosophy can teach us about our battles between good and evil, or between self and other, is that the difference that makes a difference, which is Bateson's definition of information, the difference that makes a difference is difference itself. Evil is the destruction of differences. Good is the creation of ever new differences. Differences are vital, and the good emphasizes diversity, individuation, integrity, and participation in the universal through the unique. So planetization is not a move towards collectivization. Differences are not being submerged into one worldwide or global culture. The idea is to allow an ecology of consciousness to emerge where ideas continue to exist in conflict, though in a conflict not reified into a complete separation between some self and an other. We need to be able to recognize that truth emerges out of our participation in this conflict with one another. And certainly it does seem to be a rather large transformation, a rather significant transformation of our consciousness to get us to that point. But nonetheless, I think it's a worthy task for us to attempt, at the very least. So we need to adopt some new myths, basically, to wrap this up. The myths that supported industrialism were based on an outdated Newtonian physics and an outdated Darwinian biology. And these pictures of the universe allowed us and our economy to exist as though nature were just a collection of objects. And with systems biology, with the Gaia hypothesis, what we're coming to recognize is that Earth is a community of other living creatures, and we participate with them in a larger economy. And what we used to think of as just noise outside the information of our human economy is actually valuable information in and of itself. As Bateson says, mind is immanent in nature, and our particular form of mind, as human consciousness, is no longer the sole possessor of value. Value exists in and of itself in the rest of the Earth community. Our economy, our human economy, isn't the sole attributor of value anymore from the Gaian perspective. And as was discussed in prior videos about Max Weber's recognition of this process, this move from charisma to routine, we need to make Gaia routine. The Gaia hypothesis needs to be institutionalized such that we can start to solve some of the planetary ecological problems that we're faced with. We can't do that as individual nations. It's a global problem, and the only way to bring nation states together is to bring forth a new way of participating in and performing a culture, which would be based in the Gaia hypothesis as our common ground as human beings, though we may remain diverse and unique in our own individual ways, we're still existing on the same planet. So I think that sums it up. I'd appreciate any feedback that anyone wants to give me, even though I might not get much before I actually present this tomorrow. So yeah, thanks for listening.